Hello, good morning, and welcome to this Dawn Busters Taste Challenge. We have from 1880 Windsor Canadian blended Canadian whiskey, imported, aged 3 years, bottled in Illinois, and now under the ownership of Prestige Beverage Group of Minnesota. We're in Minnesota. I'll put the link. A light, delicately flavored whiskey. Windsor is bright gold in color with a fruity aroma and packed with peppery spice and a light caramel and dry vanilla finish. Windsor exhibits higher rye notes than any of the leading competitors, they claim. Windsor Neat, Windsor Cola. Find it nearby, store locator. Mendota Heights, Minnesota. Mendota Heights, Minnesota. Okay. Windsor Neat. Pour Windsor into a glass of your choice. That's the recipe for Windsor Neat. Pour Windsor into a glass of your choice. And there's the crown. For, like, you know, the Canadian government, Queen of Canada, and fancy pants little emblem. Okay, now the competitor, Barristers. Actually, imported Barristers, Canadian gold, very light Canadian whiskey, a blend, extra fine quality. Now the website link doesn't really show anything except just a picture, a photo, and there's a fancy pants shield with fleur-de-lis and some lions and a crown for the Dominion of Canada, Queen Elizabeth II, and blah blah blah, and so on and so forth. This was introduced during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, meaning 1962, her 10th anniversary on the throne. And I don't know, you know, barristers, they have lawyers that just especially drink this. Okay, this was $9.99 at Total Wine and More. Okay, get this thing straight here. $9.99 Total Wine and More. This was $10.99 at Winn-Dixie. All right, but I think Winn-Dixie they went to only the handle bottles now. You know, the 1,750 milliliter bottles. Water. All right. So who's going to win? Well, I don't know. I did a solo review. I posted it this morning. I made a mistake, really. So I ended up posting 2 whiskey reviews in one day. I usually like to keep it to 1 a day, but I got a little backwards on it. So I said, oh, well, I'll just put them both. There are 4 Queens, which I've been reviewing. I've been taste challenging. And then the, you know, the Canadian Gold. So $1 difference, not much difference, is it? No. And let's be honest, it may be this may be $9.99 where you live, or vice versa. So we'll just call the price even. I can't say well, this is it for Canadian Gold. I'm finally finished with it. That's it. I'm not buying any more. It's done a good job. Hadn't run away with the show. But Canadian Gold, Canadian Windsor, Windsor Canadian hasn't done too bad. Hasn't done too bad. Is it worth the price? $9.99, $10.99, $11.99. Yes, I believe it's worth the price. I wouldn't pay a lot more than that, but But is it a good substitute for Crown Royal? Yeah, I think it is a good substitute for Crown Royal. Look, Crown Royal's fine, and I'm not one of these Crown Royal haters, you know, that make a career out of going around telling everybody they hate Crown Royal. You know, we all know people like that. On the other hand, it is just not that much, if at all, superior to the other lower price. You get on the Crown Royal website, yeah, it's our whiskey's so complex and it's got 50 different whiskeys in the blend. Okay, all true, and blah blah blah, and it goes on, and yeah, yippee ki-yay, mother father, and all of that. But and I'm not doubting Crown Royal's pinpoint, you know, execution and everything. But some of these cheaper ones have seem to have pretty good or even exceptional quality assurance, production values, and they probably using a fairly complex blend of barley malt whiskey, you know, like in Scotland Scotland they call it malt whiskey, and grain whiskeys and all, and then they come out all right, like this Barrister's Canadian Gold. Is it as good as Crown Royal? Well, we're going to find out because I got a taste challenge coming up. But even without doing the taste challenge, for $9.99, is it a good substitute versus $22.99? Yes, there's no doubt about that, in my opinion. So that's all they do. They show a photo. Canadian Gold, 80 proof. That's it. That's your information from Laird. They just as soon not have it listed, but at least they put a photo. They're both gold. Now this one is a little darker. And which one is it? I don't know because I didn't check. 3-year aged. You say that's the minimum. All Canadian whiskey has to be aged at least 3 years. That's right. So these are minimal, low budget, if you want to call them, products. Windsor Canadian was owned by Alberta Distillers. I think that's what it was called, Alberta Distillers. And but then they sold it to Prestige Beverage Group about a year ago. Why? I don't know why. Alberta Distiller had their own portfolio of vodka and whiskey, and they're owned by Beam Suntory. All right, so it's a subsidiary of Beam Suntory, and they sold to Prestige Beverage Group. I guess Prestige said, we can do more with it. You're not maybe doing as much as you should with the product. Well, it's like baseball or football. They trade players and whatnot. So it's just business. Good morning, Ron. Italy won the World Cup yet again. And that's right, I was watching it. And I found a bottle of Jim Beam single barrel for $25 the same day. We Italians are on a roll, it seems, says the Dixie basement. Well, that's good. Viva Italia. No clouds, but they'll be arriving. All right. Okay. Fermented cereal grain. You say, oh, not this again. Well, I don't know what you want me to say. You know, I could like sit down and make some kind of determined effort to give different adjectives for these things every time I do a taste challenge, but then that would be false and contrived. And then you just soon watch a reaction video. You know, you see these reaction videos which look like they're staged. So I don't want it to be staged. Whiskey is made from cereal grain. They ferment it. They turn it into beer. That's what it's not a beer with hops, you know, like a beer you'd buy at the store to drink, but it's a distiller's beer, because then they're going to make whiskey out of it. Then they distill it. Then they filter it and age it, or they'll age it, then filter it. It's up to them. And they'll blend it with different barrels or blend it with other whiskeys. If it's a blended whiskey, grain alcohol, and which is usually clear, odorless, colorless for the most part. And then malt whiskey. And that's the principle of the blended whiskey, whether it's Scotch, Irish, Canadian, or American. And if you look, because if you look at the process in Canada or the process in the United States, it's the same thing. Now, bourbon whiskey would not be blended with grain spirits unless it's blended bourbon, but it could be blended with different barrels. See, like a Jack Daniels, they'll blend different barrels for taste. And then they also offer, like you're saying, the single barrel, Jim Beam's single barrel, which is pulled from a single barrel. When we were on the tour at Jack Daniels, they were saying in so many words, but not directly, more indirectly. The tour guide was saying more or less like, well, single barrels kind of like a gimmick. You know, he was just saying they just grab a single barrel and they bottle it. And it seems like it's like, oh yeah, it's so special. And so it sells, it's marketable, that kind of thing, Blanton single barrel. But he was saying it's not really better. It's not, that doesn't indicate it's better quality. He said, and he was kind of saying that sometimes it's better to blend the barrels because you get a more optimum flavor. So it's just a different way of looking at it. And just like the girl at the Blanton's tour was saying, small batch doesn't really mean anything. She said it's a marketable thing. It's people say, ooh, I'm gonna get a small batch whiskey. But the other man on the tour said, what defines a small batch? She said, just less than the average regular batch. There's no specific number. So if you make a batch of whiskey and bottle it, and it's smaller than the average batch that you make, that's a small batch. Because I mean, who in the world is going to write on the bottle smaller than average batch? You know, so it's basically she was saying, yeah, it's kind of like just a gimmick, and I don't mind. I like gimmicks actually. I don't fall for them because I like them, so I'm not falling for them. I'm feeding into them. Same thing with beer. You know, it's the same thing with beer, wine, liquor. There's nothing wrong with a gimmick on its face. Now, there could be some things wrong with it as you look into it in certain particular areas of it, if it involves like fraud, deceit, and there could be some deception maybe in small batch and single barrel per se. You know, perhaps I didn't meant to say perhaps. But the bottom line is, if you buy it and you enjoy it, that's what matters. You know, yeah, that's what matters. This smells similar. Fermented cereal grain with a corn liquor aroma. Because let's get down to it. Canadian whiskey is mostly a corn whiskey. Or if you live in Europe, you might call it maize. I think they'll say maize, but corn, you know, that comes on a cob. People put butter and salt and eat it. Make popcorn with it, feed it to hogs, make gasoline with it. And it actually loses money on that, but the U.S. government subsidizes it because they're in cahoots with big agri and all of that. But you say, well, in Canadian whiskey is very similar to bourbon whiskey. Yes, it is, except bourbon whiskey uses fresh, never before used charred oak barrels. Canadian whiskey generally uses old leftover bourbon barrels, and Canadian whiskey is allowed to have flavorings added and so forth. Now, is there any rule against using fresh, new charred oak barrels in Canadian whiskey? No, there isn't. They can use it. They can use sour mash a sour mash bill like with the bourbon mash from Crown Royal. In fact, you could live in Canada and make a whiskey identical to bourbon, all the guidelines, except you couldn't call it bourbon because it's not in the United States. So you could be less than a mile across the river in Windsor, Canada, make a bourbon, but you couldn't call it bourbon. You'd have to call it Canadian whiskey. Okay, get it? All right, we got it. Maybe. All right. Contrawise, you could make a whiskey in the United States identical to a typical Canadian blended whiskey, but you couldn't call it Canadian blended whiskey because it's not made in Canada. You'd have to call it American blended whiskey. Now, you could call it a Canadian style American blended whiskey. Now, you could legally get away with that. Canadian style American blended whiskey. But I don't think there's too many people, racing to do that, because in this current day, in the whiskey drinking community, you know what I mean, Canadian whiskeys tended to be looked down upon. That's what those peasants drink. They don't know good whiskey. They don't, or I like how the whiskey snobs will say, they don't know how to drink whiskey. Dark Lotus, sup, Mr. Ron, sup with you. Even though Crown Royal's one of the top 3 or 4 in the world, but the little people, they don't know how to drink whiskey. You can tell I watch a lot of these whiskey review websites. And usually half the time I'm saying to myself, give me a break. Not, I should have had a V8. I'm not saying I should have had a V8. I'm saying, give me a break. Are you that stuck up and self-important? Speaking of gimmicks, the Jack Daniel's Sinatra Select was pretty good. I'll agree with that. My friend David let me try some, but I paid a heck of a lot less than most, so that should lead to rose-colored glasses on my end. These products always taste better when you pay less than the average price, I gotta say. Well, that tastes so regular. Corn, spicy rye. Canadian whiskey used to be called rye. People would call it rye. You took your Chevy to the levee and you were drinking whiskey and rye. That meant you were drinking whiskey, meaning like Jack Daniel's or Jim Beam, and rye, meaning you were drinking Canadian whiskey. So when they drove their Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry, and them good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye, they were drinking some American whiskey, and they meant Canadian whiskey. Same thing over her. That thing is right up. About to get right up. No, it has a minty rye whiskey thing going on. Now, if you don't like rye whiskey, this could be one of the things that's throwing people down, throwing them off of Canadian whiskey. Like, that sharp rye note. Peppery thing. Well, tells you right there on the website for Windsor Canadian, they're talking about the pepper, and I'm noticing it. But I like rye whiskey, so what the heck. But now rye whiskey, pure rye whiskey, like it's different. It's not like these blended things, because it's more like, look at the cardinal. You know what it's more like? Menthol, like a menthol cigarette. Not that I would smoke menthol cigarettes. I wouldn't be able to after April of next year, because the Empire is going to ban menthol cigarettes. You might have heard that on the news. The Empire, you say the Empire? Yeah, the Capitals in DC. They're going to ban menthol because of the little peopleoids that they control, that they look down on as like children, don't know how to take care of themselves. I was reading this. They were saying, well, this particular ethnic group who we like to control like a little marionette puppet, they They don't know what's good for themselves. And we're trying to help these little brothers and sisters of ours, and we're gonna think for them by banning menthol cigarettes, because we have to think for them because they can't think for themselves. That was the attitude. That is the attitude from the empire. So I thought that's very offensive to a thinking person. But you might say, politics these days isn't about thinking. It's about emotive reactions. You only emote. If you start to think, that's a microaggression, which could turn into a macroaggression. Okay, all right, I see that. But the rye whiskey will have the menthol flavor. To me, no. But it's like menthol bread, All right. Now, one remarkable thing about these two, I guess it's remarkable, maybe it's not remarkable, is that they don't have that big Canadian whiskey flavored thing like Sazerac has. That Sazerac house style where it's like, oh, wow, somebody went berserk with the white rum. Because you can add white rum to Canadian whiskey as a flavor, and as long as it doesn't violate a certain percentage by volume allowance. And John Anile was saying, his things taste like almond extract or something. So these are more like straight traditional whiskey flavor, if you know what I mean, like cereal grain alcohol. I don't know how else to describe it. 40% cereal grain alcohol, namely corn, and of course some rye that I just went into a rant about, and wheat, perhaps. That would soften it. Yeah, I can see wheat in here, and barley whiskey. So mostly corn, then your rye, perhaps number 2, then some wheat and some single malt, barley malt whiskey. And you'll never know because they're not going to give you the mash bill anyway. So you just got to take a sort of educated guess, try to figure it out. All right. Smells good. All right, taste again. Picking up a little sugar water taste. Sugar water. Or like nectar from a honeysuckle. Well, you say that could be the white rum that they're maybe adding. Yes, it could be. Or some sherry, because they add sherry to these blended whiskeys. And I like sherry. See, Crown Royal be more like less sweet. I think Crown Royal is more dry than these. These be more sweet. These are more like honeycomb cereal. You know what Canadian whiskey really tastes like? Honeycomb? It's Canadian Club. Boy, if you drink Canadian Club, you think you're drinking honeycomb cereal. Bye-bye, Miss American Pie. Yep. Alice Cooper said, I drove my Chevy to the levee, but my Chevy was dry. But that was the day his dead pet returned to save his life. All right. Well, I honestly, I don't think there's much difference between the two. The price is about the same, virtually the same. The body is sort of medium. The finish is sort of long on these. Kind of hangs around and gives you a little. But I guess you wouldn't go wrong either way. It's basically a tie. I'm gonna say that before I even figure out which is which. It's a tie. Like, which one should you buy? Buy both. Why not buy both? Try both. I would say that. Buy both and try both. If you hate them, so what? Yeah, would you lose? $23. You could buy 2 of these for the price of 1 Crown Royal. So hey, why not buy both of these? Check them out. See what you think. If you like them, you can keep buying them. I read some good reviews on Total Wine and More from customers saying, man, I tried that Canadian Gold. I'm never going back to Crown because this is half the price or more than half the price, and it's good and so on. I say, well, it just goes to show you. Now, so that's the story. Now let's see if I can tell them apart. Obviously, I would not drink whiskey at dawn. You'd have to be out of your mind to do that. But this is a tasting, so I feel very comfortable with doing a tasting at dawn. Now I wouldn't drink it at dawn. Sweet corn. I don't know. It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be so tough. This one's drier though. This one is dry, and it does seem to somehow have a lighter presentation. So I think the one that's drier and has the lighter presentation could be the Canadian Gold, Barrister's Canadian Gold. I only had tried it once previous to this, and that was in the solo review, which I posted earlier today. But I remember it being very Crown Royalian. You know what I mean? Crown Royalian in the sense that it was dry and it didn't have a lot of flavor in that. So I'm going to say this is the Barristers. Now, which one's better? I'll say they look the same. The price is the same. The taste is similar, not the same. And the finish is both kind of long and the body's medium. So it's a tie on quality. That's a draw. Buy what you want. Doesn't really matter. But I'm going to say, can I tell them apart? It's difficult. But I'm going to say this is the Canadian Gold. No. It's the Alberta Premium. Not the Alberta Premium. That's who used to make it. That's a all rye. I think it's 100% rye whiskey. No, it's the Windsor Canadian from Alberta Distillers, and now Prestige Beverage Group. Oh well, huh. So I actually slightly preferred the Windsor Canadian over the Barrister's Canadian Gold. Well, okay. Now, obviously, at this point, I don't have a lot of experience with Canadian Gold, so I have to process. I'm sorry, Canadian. I have to process through it over the next couple of weeks. So I have a lot of whiskeys coming up to challenge it. Crown Royal, that'll be tough, I guess, tougher than you'd think. Crown Royal Black, well, that won't be much of a contest because, you know, Crown Royal Black is distinct. And stuff like Canadian Club 12-year age. How in the world are you going to confuse Canadian Club 12-year age with this? Short answer long, you're not going to. It's not going to happen. So I got it wrong, but I don't feel too bad about it. This is just the first challenge and the second experience with Barrister's Canadian Gold. So I'm excited. You might think, oh, Lord, who wants to watch a bunch of Canadian whiskey taste challenges? If you feel that way, I can understand that. But I'm excited from my own personal enjoyment of it. So anyway, get ready because we got a lot of them coming. And then once we do that, we're off to Irish whiskey. Oh, I got this Tullamore DEW. Tullamore DEW, and you will love to hear the price I paid because it is going to seem like a lie. Oh, it's worse than regular tobacco because a minority likes it. I guess what's next, but I'm afraid to give those idiots an idea, says Dixie Baseman. I never thought of it before, but it does cause a menthol-like effect. Oh, you're talking about the whiskey, yeah. Okay. Yeah, those people that run the empire are really maniacs. They're like Hannibal Lecter or something, you know. All right, anyway, thanks for watching this video production.